I'm supposed to talk about anxiety and depression. I'll do my best to see how much I could fit into a relatively short period of time. So this is all the ways that anxiety could show itself in a school, and I'm sure there are many other ways to think about it. But let me go to talking about. First, I'm going to start with something boring, because it's important to review the diagnostic criteria for the most common kind of anxiety problem, generalized anxiety. And the reason for talking about this is just so you know, get a little bit of a cognitive map of when this crosses the line from being just anxiety. Everybody's anxious at some point. It's part of what we all do for a living, right? Because we get anxious, we get nervous. But here the question is, when does it cross the line into something that needs referral and may actually really be helped by a therapist, the possibility of either some regular, at least consultation or therapy, or in some cases medication. So you have to look at this entire list, okay? So it's excessive anxiety and worry, okay, occurring more days than not for at least 6 months. So it's dominant. You can't control the worry, and it's associated with 3 or more in this Chinese menu style the following symptoms. So you have at least 3 of these: the restlessness, being tired all the time, problem concentrating because of the anxiety, irritability, muscle tension, and or sleep disturbance. Now, we all know people who for brief periods of time, when something really scary is going on, or let's say there's some major life event, that might get in the way here. But when does it cross the line from anxious style or just normal kinds of life challenges to a full-blown concern that you should look into this? Okay, so basically that's when this is the key slide. You ready? You have to pay attention now. It's boring, but you have to pay attention. It's going to be on the test. Okay, so number 1 is when the anxiety really causes distress or impairment in work, love, or play, meaning like real impairment, that the kid can't do his or her schoolwork. The kid can't form friendships the way one would expect for a child to be able to. And the kid can't enjoy himself or herself. Okay? So that would be, and when you have clinically significant upset about it or disturbance, okay, and the disturbance is not due to something else going on like reaction to a medication, coupled with all the other stuff, that's when, you know what, it makes sense to call. If in doubt, call. You could either talk to your pediatrician or talk to your, your local mental health person. If your school has support staff for mental health, that would be ideal. And that's when you do that. Okay, fine. Now, I know that was boring. Hopefully you'll get a copy of this. I think I gave copies of this to be distributed. If not, I just have to be reminded to send a electronic copy of this. You really don't have to listen to a word I say. Okay? We're good? Now we're going to get to the real stuff. Now it's going to get interesting. Okay? It's very hard to speak to people over lunch. It's sort of like, hard to get focus going. So sip on your coffee. And here we go. Why am I showing you the monkeys? Okay, I haven't lost it. Look at this monkey, okay? And now look at this monkey, okay? And now I'm going to make sense of all of this, okay? Let's talk about this monkey. A lot of what we know about anxiety, and believe me, this is practical, comes from monkey research in naturalistic monkey labs. Now, we know about it from research on kids also, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the bottom line is that there's a guy named Suomi, S-U-O-M-I, who, along with other researchers, has discovered that 15% of monkeys are anxious. Now, how you determine that, I'm not sure, but they know how to measure it. 15% of monkeys have an anxious style. Some of them graduate from anxiety and anxious style into an anxiety disorder. And interestingly, 1 in 6 children also have an anxious style. Sometimes it'll graduate into full-blown anxiety disorder, and sometimes it won't. The focus of much of my talk will be, how do you educate these kids in a way that maximizes the chance that it will not interfere with their functioning and will not graduate into full-blown anxiety disorder? Okay? That's the point. So now let's go for it. In the naturalistic monkey lab, here's what they find. Take a look at this monkey. This is one of those anxious monkeys, okay? What we know about the anxious monkeys is the following, and it's amazing. By the way, here's the ADHD monkey, but this is at exactly a moment that an SST, okay? Those of you who are old enough will remember there used to be twice a day, every day, certainly in the 5 towns of Long Island, a supersonic transport plane that would be flying, the Concorde, flying on the way from JFK to Brooklyn or to France, I'm sorry, to England or to France, and it would break the sound barrier. My childhood was marked by sitting in a window in the yeshiva I went to and looking out the window and being able to almost set my watch by when the sound barrier was broken. But it would be scary to these monkeys in the lab. And this is at the moment that an SST is flying over, and the anxious monkey buries himself into his mother. Okay? Now, and again, here is the ADHD monkey trying to catch the SST, because that's what they do. Okay? Now, let's go back to this monkey. This is what we're going to be, let's go back to this monkey. This is the one that we're going to be talking about. Here's what we know about them. If they are abused or their mother somehow is killed by a predator, they will fall apart much more than a non-anxious monkey, much more than the other 85% of the monkey population. They need, just like children do, more of a protective shield than any other monkey does, okay? They just need it. But here's the main point I want to make for this, and it's a wonderfully heartening concept. And that's that if this monkey is protected from bad things happening and just has regular old events, like the mothers go off to mate for 3 weeks every year, okay, they could survive with that. But if they're given protection and love and stability, they grow up to be leaders of the pack. Isn't that amazing? Think about the anxious kids you may have known when you were younger. And think about the ones that had good parenting and good educators. Didn't many of them grow up to be our current leaders? I'm thinking about over the course of my practice of 40 plus years, some of the anxious kids who I would see during transition periods in their lives, because they would always fall apart during transition periods when they'd go from elementary school to a new building in middle school, when they'd go from middle school to high school, when they'd go off to summer camp for the first few years, when they would go off to learn in Israel in seminary, or when they would get married. And each time I would see them during those transition points, go over with them basic coping skills, okay? Teaching them how to talk to themselves, teaching them what kind of coping mechanisms work best, teaching them how to talk to themselves in a way that would chill themselves out, teaching how to do some relaxation exercises, teaching how to behaviorally do certain interventions. And invariably, when those kids would hit the next transition stage, they'd come back for a refresher course because they'd need it. And then I'd see them for maybe 4 or 5 sessions. They'd go off. As a matter of fact, there was once a kid who followed this to a T. And I always told the mother, like let's say after I finished seeing her in 6th grade, I started, we'd finish with the 6th grade. I'd say, I'll see you again when she starts high school. And the mother would come by like clockwork because you get a sense of what the pressure points are in kids' lives when you're in practice for a long enough time. A week after Sheva Brachos of this young woman, she comes to my office because she needed some help after Sheva Brachos. She was an anxious kid. And she had a little letter in her hand, and she gives it to me. It was sealed, and I opened it up. And when I opened it up, here's what the letter said. 3 words, right on schedule. Okay? So it's pretty predictable. But why is it that anxious kids, given the right kind of childhood, grow up to be leaders of the pack? Think about the anxious people you know. Don't they connect more deeply than other people? Don't they take their work responsibilities more seriously than other people? Aren't they often very tuned in to doing what's right? When we take many of the wonderfully adaptive characteristics of an anxious child, I have one of my children has an anxious style. And luckily, she had a wonderful mother, my wife, and hopefully I helped out a little bit also. And we followed a lot of the recommendations I'm about to give you. And I wasn't at all surprised, none of us were surprised, when she grew up to be a real successful person, very beloved person, and an incredible community leader. Okay? Not at all surprised. Of course, I'm speaking from a total standpoint of objectivity. Okay? But you could ask anybody. You could ask my wife. She'll tell you the same thing. Okay? So here goes. So that's the first point. Oh, I just did something I shouldn't have. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so let's talk about number 1, the importance of managing expectations. The Lechel Hanamol is, we're told that in the Gemara that, and in other sources, that just like we could learn from the ant, so could we learn from monkeys. That's my theological justification for the Suomi stuff. Here's the elevator analogy, and this is the first recommendation, which is when anxious kids act like anxious kids, expect it. They're going to be clingy and whiny and annoying at some point because that's what they do. Here's the elevator analogy. It's a nice way of thinking about this, okay? So here it goes. Imagine yourself in an elevator in Midtown Manhattan in the Empire State Building at 5 to 9 in the morning. I heard this analogy from my colleague, Dr. Johnny Krug, okay? So here's what Johnny says. So you're in an elevator, it's 5 to 9 in the morning, and you're being crowded big time. And people are crowding your space, and you have no space to breathe even. And everybody's jockeying to get into space, to be able to get out on their floor, and it's an unpleasant, suffocating experience. And you're getting out, let's say, on the 52nd floor, and the guy behind you is really pushing into you. He's like jabbing his hands into your back. You're not sure what he's doing, but he's really invading your space. And you decide that when he gets off at whatever floor he's going to, you're going to give him the dirtiest look you have. And have you ever seen that when you're driving your car on the highway and there's some guy driving you crazy by going too slow or cutting you off, and you catch up to him or her, and it makes you feel better by giving him or her a dirty look. So you wait till he's getting off at the 43rd floor, and you're ready with your dirtiest look. And you look back at him, and you see that he's blind. He's blind. What was jabbing into your back is a cane, because he was trying to steady himself. It's not easy to be in a crowded elevator in the Empire State Building at 5 to 9 in the morning. And now What is that realization of his blindness due to your emotional reaction? Your righteous indignation turns to empathy. You're wanting to give him a dirty look, turns to not only you're wanting to be nosei bo l'chavero, to share in his pain, but you now want to help him off the elevator. That's the key to dealing with anxious and depressed kids. To remind yourself, even though they may be annoying, depression comes with irritability, for example, okay? It often comes with what seems like a lack of empathy. It's not easy to love somebody who's always negative, but to remind yourself that this is their wiring, this is their challenge, and it's not all that different from the blind man in the elevator, okay? So here's the bottom line. How do you deal with an anxious kid? By the way, anxiety levels are going up exponentially around the Western world. The most frequent topic I'm asked to talk about around the world, it could be South Africa, it could be Melbourne, it could be Zurich, or it could be Toronto, okay, and certainly around the United States, is anxiety in children. There's a tremendous rise, not just in the frum world, in the secular world as well. Reasons why we don't have time to go into. A lot probably to do with digital technology. Kids are exposed now to more than they ever were. They're exposed to a lot of horrible stuff. There's a lot more pressure. By the way, we're seeing it in Haredi communities and Hasidic communities as much as we're seeing it in more Litvish communities, and more modern communities are totally secular communities. So it's not tied to the religion or to academic pressure alone. So here's the story. Dr. Jerome Kagan, a professor at Harvard, started his career many years ago wanting to prove that shyness was pretty much having to do with parenting, not with biology. And he went on over the next 30, 40, 50 years to prove definitively that shyness and anxiety is actually genetic and biologically driven. Sure, environment has a lot to do with it, but the main determinants are often biological. In one of the more famous studies done by a guy named Plowman, he took a large group of kids adopted away at birth and looked at them at age 3 to see, are their anxiety levels more like the biologic parents who they never knew and never met, or more like the adoptive parents, the psychological parents who raised them. Common sense would say they never knew the parents, their birth parents, they only knew their psychological parents, their adoptive parents. Turns out the anxiety levels are almost 100% correlated with the biological parents, with their birth mother and father who they never knew. That's pretty compelling. And there's a lot of other kinds of evidence that you see over here on this. But here is who graduates into the disorder. Which anxious kids, and by the way, this is somewhat true of depression as well. Which anxious kids graduate from anxious style into anxiety disorder? So what he found at Harvard, Dr. Kagan, was parents who place excessive emphasis on how a child presents to others, proper dress, grooming, and social decorum. It's called impression management. You know, a lot of emphasis on make sure you don't embarrass us. A lot of emphasis not on the internal needs of the child, but on the external needs of the child. Listen to this, okay? Beautiful way of talking about the antidote to this, okay? Rav Kook. Yesh ben chorin sherucho ruach shel eved. There are free people who have the spirit of a slave. V'yesh eved sherucho malei acherus. And there are slaves who have a spirit filled with freedom. And here's the key. Hanemon la'atzmi yuso ben chorinhu. Somebody who's faithful to their inner essence is always going to be a free person. Umisha kochayav rak b'mashatov yafa be'enei acherim. Somebody whose entire life is only about what will other people think? Mention Reddit. What are people going to say? Whoever. I can't tell you how many people I know and who I see on a regular basis who should be the greatest of free people, who are profoundly wealthy, profoundly privileged, and yet they're bigger slaves than the families I know who are living in real poverty, objectively in poverty, but have a strong inner sense of what's right and what's not right. That's the way we have to raise our children, and that's an antidote to this component of anxiety. Number two, the Dr. Kagan found, they socialize little themselves and discourage visits of the child's friends. It's all about the modeling. I heard the Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik said, what does it mean in Avos when we're constantly saying, Hu haya omer, Hu haya omer? You go throughout Avos, you see it all over. The Hu haya omers. You know what he says, the Rav Soloveitchik? He says, it wasn't so much that the person said this all the time. It was that his very essence conveyed this truth. Whatever the truth might have been, it was so central to what values he was passionate about and the way he lived his life. It's not that he said it with his mouth all the time, but that he lived it. So anybody who knew him experienced that hashpah on their lives. Okay? So that's that next component, is if you're modeling, you won't take your kid to a friend's house for a sleepover because you're not so comfortable socializing with your friend's parents, or you won't take him or her to a birthday party, or to whatever social event there might be. Obviously, the kid's is not going to get better, okay? They keep themselves and their children away from anxiety-inspiring social events, and in general are overprotective. So the children drown in the chicken soup of their parents. The only way to overcome the anxiety of this kind of temperament is to learn, and this is the two most important words of this lecture, is to learn how to avoid avoidance, okay? So that's this slide. This is the most important slide. You ready? Okay? You have to avoid excessive reassurance. When you have an anxious kid coming to you and complaining to you about how nervous they are, of course you want to support them. But before you support them, you have to teach them to face the anxiety. You only overcome anxiety if you face it. You have to face it. You have to avoid avoidance. So how do you do that? What does that look like? Okay? So what it looks like is they'll ask for reassurance far more frequently than the other kids in your class. Your temptation, because you're nurturing, loving women, you automatically say, don't worry, everything will be okay. It's fine. But that is not going to teach the kid. It's not going to teach her how to self-regulate. You want to teach her how to soothe herself. Okay, so this may inadvertently reinforce anxiety by rewarding attention seeking. Here's the key. This will be on your final. Okay, you ready? Okay. You ask the following. What can you say to yourself that might make it more okay? You'll reassure them a little later. That's fine. You're not going to sadistically not try to soothe them and calm them down. But your first response should be, look, we'll talk about how to calm yourself down. But what can you say to yourself that might make it more okay? Okay? You let them know if you're going to start to do this. You might want to use a rewarding system at efforts for them trying to self-soothe. Let me tell you over a Dvar Torah from Rav Henoch Leibowitz, who had been the Rosh Yeshiva of Chafetz Chaim in the last generation. And this Dvar Torah helped at least 4 people I know who had mild obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a form of anxiety disorder, okay? When you hear it, it'll make sense, and this is worth going over, okay? Here it is. It's the Akedah. There's a medrash on the Akedah. So Avram is on his way to bringing Yitzchak to the Akedah, and Samael, an agent of the Sutton, comes and screams at him and says, old man, are you out of your mind? You finally get a son in your old age, and you're going to slaughter him? Are you crazy? You're not going to get another chance. And Avram answers, Amanas Cain, even so. Then he keeps going. Don't you realize that when your wife Sarai hears about this, she's going to die of grief and fright and upset? And he answers, Samuel answers, Amanas Cain. And he keeps going on and on, question after question, complaint after complaint, trying to suck Avram into a debate. So Rav Henoch asks, why not give the best answer in the history of mankind? What's the answer? I'm on a mission from God. God told me to do this. So he says no. He says, you want to know? You want to know why Avram answered even so? Because he knew in dealing with the Satan, which is what anxiety is to a certain extent, it's irrational. In dealing with that inner voice that's telling you that you have to argue and argue and argue as a way of calming your anxiety, and always makes anxiety worse, sometimes the answer is no argument. Even so, even so, even so. And that quiets that voice that could suck you into the quicksand. So this recommendation is basically to again, say, what can you say to yourself that might make it more okay? And not to get sucked into the endless loop that anxious kids have, and sometimes depressed kids have, of hopelessness and despair, because it doesn't lend itself to that. Okay, let's keep going. Okay? Dangers, let's talk a little bit about the power of mistakes. Okay? We have 15 minutes for the power of mistakes, and I want to spend at least a little bit of time expanding some stuff on depression. First story. I'm going to tell you two stories that'll make this very clear. Okay? Maybe a quick Dvar Torah is, it says in the Gemara, Ein Adam Omed al Divrei Torah Elim Kein Nichshol Behem. You can't master the words of Torah without failing. Okay? So here's point number one. It's the story of Keith Jarrett. Keith Jarrett is one of the leading jazz pianists of all time. Very well-known jazz pianist. In 1975, he went to perform a sold-out concert in a concert hall for 6,000 in Cologne, Germany. He gets to the concert hall early in the morning to start practicing that concert piano and discovers that it's totally unusable, the piano. All the keys on the left-hand side, there are no pads. You can bang down on it all you want, no music will play. All the keys on the right-hand side, you could bang down on it, no music will play. The middle keys will play, but only out of tune, and only if you bang down on it as hard as you can. For some reason, I don't understand, a 17-year-old girl was put in charge of preparing the piano, having that piano. When he turns to her, he says, we have to get another piano. I can't perform on this piano. And she calls all over Europe, can't get a piano. So he turns to her and he says, we're going to have to cancel this concert. I literally can't play on this piano. Being a 17-year-old girl, as many of you know, you could imagine what that kind of public humiliation would do to her. She goes crazy. She has a tantrum. She throws herself on the floor. She says, my life is over. I'm going to kill myself. And she's going on and on and on about her life is over. And he's a soft touch. So he says, okay, I'll do what I could do. 6,000 people come to the concert hall, and he goes on to perform a concert that to this day is the best-selling jazz piano concert in history. You could Google it, not now, later, okay? Keith Jarrett, Cologne, Germany, 1975. It is magnificent. You hear him huffing and puffing as he's smashing onto the keys, but it brings out that stress, that impossible demand, brings out a sublime beauty and creativity, the likes of which almost nobody has ever heard. It's amazing. Ein Adam Omen al Divrei Torah Kein Nichshol Behem. We have to teach our children and we have to teach our parents that obstacles are the engine of growth. In France, they discovered that kids do better if you teach them to embrace their mistakes and their failures. And they discovered this in a whole bunch of research studies. So they started to celebrate mistakes of Parisian school children with something called Failcon, Failcon. They'd have a big festival of errors where people would come and they'd celebrate their mistakes. As a matter of fact, the Kohelet Foundation of Philadelphia now gives out an award to Jewish educators who submit to them for review a project that you try to do in your yeshiva that failed. And you explain what you did, why it failed, maybe how you might do it differently next time. And they give out a lot of money. I think it's tens of thousands of dollars. I forget how much. And they gave out the first awards just this last year. Huh? $36,000, twice high, okay? It's pretty amazing. One of my former students got one of them. You know, failure is an incredible gift. The Hebrew word chet, we know what it means. It means to miss the mark, right? The archers of Shevet Binyamin, lo yachti. They never miss the mark. So what that means is when we mess up, it's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for learning. And that's what we want to go after. And in fact, this whole idea of the power of mistakes is present all the way through. Do you know that even in learning, I have a whole PowerPoint I often will show that talks about how in the classroom you could do this. Like if you give kids some learning assignments that are a little out of focus, just the fact that they have to concentrate a little harder to get it in focus, they'll remember it better. Fill-in tests, you do better and retain more than if it's tests that are just multiple choice. And they're example after example of that. And we need to do a better job of teaching parents how you could cripple a child by never frustrating them, okay? They need that kind of challenge in order to move on. Okay, let's keep going. And one last thing, and then I'll go to depression. It's the work of Dr. Oliner, and this is extremely important. How do we handle our mistakes is a key way of teaching children how to internalize the lessons we want to give them. It's what Elul is all about. Some people say Elul backwards is Lule. How do we handle the Yevonlis? How do we handle our regrets? Dr. Oliner was a little boy when in his small town in Poland, the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, took everybody he ever knew. His parents, his grandparents, his siblings, his neighbors, lined them up and brutally murdered them. In the chaos, he walked to the edge of the town and sees a farmhouse. He's a little boy. He knocks on the door, and the owner of the farmhouse, this woman, takes him in. And at peril to her life, and the life of her husband and children and everybody she knew, she took him in, loved him and nourished him and protected him throughout the war. After the war, an uncle who had survived takes him and rescues him and brings him to this country. And he goes on to get a PhD in sociology, marries a woman with a PhD in sociology, and he dedicates his life to going back to Europe and interviewing every righteous Gentile he could find to find out what are the active ingredients in developing such a moral hero as a righteous Gentile. And it's interesting. He found a common thread in the numerous books he wrote about the parenting of righteous Gentiles. How do you raise a moral giant? He said a lot of it had to do with the lules. A lot of it had to do with how were mistakes handled in that world. In the future righteous Gentile. If they messed up, the parents would hold them to it. But here's what characterized the tshuva process. Calmness, belief in their ability to learn how to do the right thing, and a reparation process. What's the tshuva process? How are you going to make it right? Oh, come on, I know you're better than this. I know you're better than this. Let's talk about let's review what the rule was, what you could have done differently, and how to do it differently. It was done with such calmness and such kindness and such belief in the child's ability to do better that they internalized it in a way that a child could never internalize if they're protected from facing their failures, if they have parents who have them drown in their chicken soup. So that's another extremely important point. And let me now end with a couple of stories, but first let me go to a brief, if I could have the depression slide. Whoa, that was good. A round of applause for our wonderful, the South Africans know how to do it. Thank you. Okay, here we go. You ready? Depression. Okay, depressive disorder, again, it's an illness that involves body, mood, and thoughts. Affects the way a person eats and sleeps, the way they feel about themselves, and the way they think about things. Okay? It's not the same as a passing blue mood, not a sign of personal weakness, or a condition that can be willed or wished away. People with depressive illness cannot merely pull themselves together and get better. Can't slap them across the face and have them say, thanks, I needed that. Okay? Okay. Without treatment, it gets worse. An untreated depressive disorder will change the brain and make it more likely that the child or the adolescent will go on to have a lifetime of recurring depressive disorders. When you, as mechanchos, are able to catch it and see it and not look the other way and get the right kind of help for that child, it literally is changing the trajectory of their lives and of their children's lives and their grandchildren's life. It's probably one of the most significant things anybody alive could do. I envy your ability to do this. Okay? Next. Okay. Here's the DSM-5 criteria. You're not going to remember it, but you can always Google DSM-5 major depressive disorder. Okay? Here you go. 5 or more of the following symptoms have been present during the same 2-week period with either a depressed mood or a thing called anhedonia, something that the girl used to love no longer gives her interest or pleasure. Okay? Anhedonia, used to love to knit, or used to love to hang out with friends, or used to love to play chess, or whatever it might be, and they no longer get pleasure from what used to give them pleasure. Okay? Here's the list. Okay? Depressed mood, sorry about that, depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective report. They'll talk about feeling sad. By the way, a big one with girls, okay, is I'm so bored. I'm so bored, okay? Or observation made by others appears tearful, okay? Or it could be irritable mood. I said to the Manalos earlier that very often kids' behavior problems come in 2 flavors, garlic or onion. Garlic makes everybody else miserable. Onion is where they themselves are miserable. Depressed kids, it's often an everything bagel, a mixture of garlic and onion, and it's irritability, okay? Markedly diminished interest or pleasure in almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day. You just need some of this. Significant weight loss or weight gain. Sleep problem, remember that's body. Insomnia or hypersomnia, like Yona B'mei Hadaga, nearly every day. And then you have slow down, like moving through water, or it could be agitation. So hyperactivity may, in fact, underneath it, be depression, okay? Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day, feeling worthless and broken, problems with thinking or concentrating, and then recurrent thoughts of death, okay, like suicide, recurrent suicidal ideation without a plan or suicide attempt or a specific plan for committing suicide. That's what often happens. Obviously, any of these things are an emergency, and you have to act on it immediately because you're literally dealing with pikuach nefesh. But you have to, the eye sees only what the mind knows. You have to be ready to look at it. You have to be ready to see it. You can't be in a rush. You have to be focused. You can't be preoccupied with other things. In the Princeton Seminary study, they found that when seminarians were in a rush on their way to giving a drasha on halama. You have to stop and help people out. If they were in a rush, they wouldn't practice what they preach and stopped to help two psychologists feigning a heart attack. Or the core is to not always feel rushed and to be focused. Whereas the Baal Shem Tov said, the Piaseczner Rebbe quotes the Baal Shem Tov as having said that what we read in this week's Parsha, okay, and we read a few times every day, V'avadetem mehera. The Baal Shem Tov means get rid of the rush in your life. V'avadetem mehera. Get rid of the rush in your life if you want to be able to see things and really get into the heart of your students, because that's also the key, okay? Now, and then, like with anxiety, the symptoms have to cause significant distress or impairment and not be part of physiology. Let me end with a story, okay? That's good, right? We have it all? Okay? No, that's not too fast. It's fine. You should be able to pull this in. There's a lot of good stuff here, okay? But how to help the depressed person? You could read this as I end with the following story, because I try to end on time, okay? And don't worry, I never intended to get everything done. All of these will be available to you, and a lot of this stuff is online. If you Google D. Pelcowitz Google pages, you'll see under new lectures probably tapes of this or MP3s of this, as well as some PowerPoints. You ready? Here's the concluding story. How many of you heard the story of the Rebbe that sent birthday cards? Anybody know the birthday card Rebbe? Okay. How many of you didn't hear it? Okay, so I'm going to say it. Sorry, guys. Take a nap. Okay? Here's the Rebbe who sent birthday cards. Okay. I'm in a town, not here, and I was talking about some of the things we were just talking about. And there's an 8th grade Rebbe. And the 8th grade Rebbe comes over to me in that school, and he says, let me tell you a story. He said, I've been teaching for 30 years. And every year, at the end of the year, every summer around this time of year, I prepare birthday cards for my former Talmidim, going back for 30 years. I take the top 5 who were struggling the most when they were in my class, going back for 30 years, the ones who back then came from families whose parents had depression or had more severe mental illness, from families where maybe there was some legal trouble or high conflict divorce or terrible physical challenges or death, God forbid, of a parent or grandparent. And takes me no time at all. He says, I'll buy large number of birthday cards. I'll address it. I track their addresses. And it takes me, I put stamps on every one of the envelopes. It takes me no more than 5 minutes per child. I just write a note, dear Chaim, just wanted to tell you that I remember you well when you were in my class 20 years ago. I remember some of the struggles that you went through, but as you know, I also remember the amazing spark you had, the amazing skill you had, and I'll talk about some positive things about the kid. I just want you to know, here's my cell phone. You can call me anytime. I'm here for you. Okay. Told me that a couple of weeks earlier, he gets a phone call from a student he had had in 8th grade 15 years earlier. And the kid calls him and says, Rebbe, you saved a life last night. He says, what are you talking about? He says, Rebbe, you saved a life last night. He said, what do you mean? He said, I've been struggling with depression. I've had an incredibly difficult life, going back for as long as you've known me. And I had it. I'm living in a little studio apartment. I've been having just real struggles, continued struggles with depression and failure to launch and difficulty with moving on in life. And I decided I'm going to end it. I'm going to kill myself. That's it. I've had it. And I go to the bathroom. I've been nursing my psychiatric medication. And I take a pile of pills in one hand and a glass of water in the other. And I go and I sit on my bed fully intending to make that my last minutes on this earth. And as I'm taking the pills and about to swallow them down, out of the corner of my eye, I see 15 birthday cards on display on a shelf in the corner of my studio. It was the 15 birthday cards you sent me over the last 15 years. And I remember, I matter. I matter. Somebody cares about me. I matter. And I run to the bathroom, and I flush those pills down the toilet. And I want to take a shvuah now, Rebbe. I will never do that again. For as long as I live, I will never do that again. Okay? That's what you do. That's what you do. That's the power of connection, the power of caring, the power of being there and believing in your students and embracing them, even though they may be a little difficult, they may be whining, they may be clingy, they may be irritable, they may be the 10% of students that take 90% of your time. But in the schluss of doing this, as we get ready, getting ready, we're not that far from Elul, right? Getting ready to blow that shofar. In that schluss, may you all have a wonderful new school year, a wonderful new commitment to helping our children reach their full potential. Thank you, everybody.